Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us at this next Innovation Policy Platform webinar. We've been on a bit of a summer break, but welcome back. My name is Justin Hill and I work in the Innovation Entrepreneurship team here in the World Bank. And today I'm joined, in fact, by a colleague, Victor Mulas, and I'll introduce Victor in a moment. But thank you for joining us. This webinar will go for about an hour. Victor will present for about 35 minutes, and as usual, then we'll have an opportunity for 25 minutes or so of questions. If you have any questions, please just type them in, and we'll see if we can pitch them to Victor at the conclusion of his presentation. Today we're looking at cities and city-based innovation. In previous webinars, we've looked at a whole range of innovation policy issues which occur really at the national level, and we also had a presentation on subnational or regional innovation. But today we're going one level lower and looking in particular at innovation in cities. And this is a field which is really exciting and growing. I think in the past, innovation was seen as something that simply happened in cities, but cities were not really seen as part of the process. But now they very much are, and cities themselves, I read the other day that even in Asia alone, over 120,000 people are moving to cities every day. So cities very much are the place where innovation is increasingly happening. And so today, Victor will be talking about that and his experiences both in the developed world, working in places like Barcelona and New York, but also drawing on practical experience where he's working in Beirut and Cairo in the Middle East, and also in South America, in Colombia and Chile. Victor works in our ICT practice. He's a specialist in technology innovation, in particular ICT-driven innovation. He comes from that industry. That's where he worked prior to joining the bank, and now he works on a range of projects exploring both city-based innovation, but also how to build innovation ecosystems and how to link innovation ecosystems which may be quite localised, but linking them internationally. So with I might throw to Victor. Victor, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll very much looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Justin. Hello. Welcome, everyone. My presentation is about innovation within cities, and the focus is going to be the tech startup ecosystems and how to increase innovation in cities through the use of these ecosystems. The agenda for today will cover three areas. The first one will be global trends on innovation and entrepreneurship in cities, because cities are becoming hubs of innovation. Then I will talk about the key success factors of city innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystems. And finally, I will talk about policies for growth and sustainability of these ecosystems. And although the focus will be cities, these policies can also be applied at a national level. Just a little brief acknowledgement, and the sources of this presentation are based on ongoing research that we are doing within the Global Entrepreneurship Research Network, particularly together with Endeavour Insight. It's also based on technical World Bank activities, as Justin was pointing out. Also from knowledge sharing from practitioners from the network of innovation hubs in cities that the World Bank is leading. It also draws from research from independent researchers like Talia Kaufman from MIT or Matt G from the University of Chicago. So then I will start with the global trends, and because I want to give you an introduction of what is happening and how this affects the success factors and policies. I will talk later. The first part is we are seeing that innovation is decentralizing, and one of the things we are witnesses is there is a change of model from traditional R&D facilities that were required a lot of funding, and they were they're very large, therefore required large companies to do it, to to a more decentralized kind of model. And this is because technology is reducing considerably the cost to innovate and to access to market. You cannot see it in the presentation because there is a missing part. You will see it when the final presentation is for download. But basically, what we are seeing is a reduction of cost of innovation in the last 15 years for tech startups, particularly, has decreased in 99%. If in the 90s you require $1 million, $1.5 million to do a startup, right now you can even do it for $2,000 to $50,000. This is also affecting and disrupting traditional industries. You are seeing that the disruption happening in different sectors. So this is forcing the startups, the companies, to go through open innovation models. What are those open innovation models? It is to do the innovation not alone, but with others, particularly with entrepreneurs and startups, to open problems and challenges to work together with these startups instead of doing it alone. So this one of the things that we are seeing also is entrepreneurship is growing in cities and it's growing worldwide. If before we were seeing that entrepreneurship and innovation was more like a science park kind of model, now what we are seeing is spreading within urban environments, particularly downtown of cities. There is research on this area done by Richard Florida, where you can see how this innovation is moving from the suburbs of cities in the US to downtown of cities, and it's even happening in San Francisco, from Silicon Valley to downtown San Francisco. But the important thing for us, and what I want to make the point on, is this is happening worldwide. It's happening in developing countries, regardless of the income. The map that you are seeing is one of the many maps that are being produced to try to map the startups that are happening. But what I want you to see is that this is a global phenomenon, and it's growing in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, Europe, and the US, and it's basically in these urban environments. The other trend that we are seeing is that these tech startups are creating basically this new source of competitiveness. Why? Because they are creating new businesses. They are also creating new sources of employment, and I will talk about that in a little second. But what we are seeing is how what it was tech startups in the 90s are only applied to technology sector, now they are disrupting other sectors. And if you look at the chart, it's putting together the largest unicorn of the last 5-6 years that happened in the US. And if you start looking at them, Uber is addressing the taxi market, Airbnb is hotels, SpaceX is about space and rockets industry, WeWork is real estate, Square is about mobile payments. What you're seeing is how new industries are happening and where the competitiveness for a city of a country can be developed.
Victor, I'm going to interrupt here just for a second. Can you explain very briefly what a unicorn is?
Yes, sorry about that. A unicorn refers to those startups that make it into a large company that can scale up and become a multinational. So that happens usually at a rate of 1% of startups, because that's a decrease that happens from all the beginning of the ideas. So you need a very large ecosystem for these unicorns to happen, and very mature. In the US, those ecosystems happen, and you have companies like that. So you can see Uber started in 2009, we're in 2015, and it's a company that has revenues of $800 million. And then you have around 77,500 employees, not counting the drivers about that. So it's an established company. Google would be another unicorn that happened before. This is the kind of sources that we are looking for. So the other effect that we are looking at is the creation of employment and new sources of employment. And in today's economy, that's really important, because we are talking about the new jobs that are being generated. The example here, it's about research that has been done in New York about the impact of new employment generated by the tech startup ecosystem in the city of New York. This happened primarily between 2008 and 2014, and it was the development of the ecosystem with the help of policies that we're going to see later, promoted by the City Hall. And the interesting thing, I want to point out to three facts in this chart. The first one is you can see the rate of the tech ecosystem employment in New York. It's far greater than the rate of the US or New York. It grows faster, and that's very interesting. The second one is if you see at the charts of the different categories of employment, you have 58,000 tech industry jobs that were generated within this time frame, but then you have 150,000 of tech jobs generated in non-tech industry. That is very interesting because you are generating 3 times more jobs in non-tech industry, i.e. the startups are creating 58,000 employment. They are the companies that are not a startup, that are traditional industries in New York, are creating 150,000 employment that are tech employment. And this, of course, has to do with development of technologies within the city, but it also has to do with responding to what the startups are creating, like the disruption of markets of the startups. And it's also because of the vibe of the startup ecosystem. And you're seeing that the dynamic into getting more technology is getting into these industries. The other point that I think is very, very interesting is that the jobs generated in the tech startup ecosystem in New York, 44% of them are below bachelor's degree. So now we are taking about the possibility of generating employment for low education and low income population. We're going to talk about that later in the policies and how we are working on that area. So these are the general trends that we are talking about. They don't cover all of them, but I try to highlight the ones that are more relevant to our presentation. What I'm going to talk about now are the key success factors that we have identified in tech startup ecosystems. What are the key success factors that make them grow and be sustainable? So the first thing that we need to, in looking at that, is to see that these tech startup ecosystems, they are growing in cities, as I said before. It's a global trend, but they are not growing at the same pace. Some cities are growing an ecosystem faster than others and are having more success than others. When you see that in the charts, and I apologize because this is ongoing research, so you don't have the axis, but basically it's number of startups by number of years. This is part of the mapping of the Santiago de Chile mapping of startups that Endeavor Insight is conducting. And what we can see is the usual trend of these tech startup ecosystems. They follow an exponential curve. However, not in everywhere that happens. And sometimes the ecosystem gets stalled and doesn't grow, and in others doesn't even kickstart. So why that happens? So in analyzing that, we wanted to think how innovation happens, and we wanted to research about that. And one of the things we were looking at is really how do you come into an idea? What makes innovators come into an idea? And one of the issues we found is the theory of random collisions. That it is very difficult to come with an idea by yourself, but usually if you connect with other people, that idea gets developed. And this is like this random collision that happens in events like eating or drinking or going to the park, finding something that is happening. Usually that happens in cities. So it makes a lot of sense that now innovation is starting to happen in cities. So now the question that we're having is, how do you increase this number of collisions that happen? And is that possible to generate those ideas? But of course, generating the idea is not the only thing. After generating the idea, you have to make it come into market and to make the startup happen. And for that, it is very difficult to do that by yourself as a person individually. You need also to work with other people, to give you ideas, to connect with other people that will give you resources, that have the experience of doing that before, that can help you through the process. And that is what we are seeing is happening in the successful ecosystem. So what you are seeing in the chart is basically the depiction of the connections that entrepreneurs are having in New York City. That is a survey that was done to New York City founders, and what Endeavor Insight, that is the one that did this research, was asking is what are the connections that were more useful for you as a startup, and you can see them in the colors there. who inspire you to do the startup, who help you with investment, usually an angel investor, who is a serial entrepreneur and becoming founding after founding, who was a mentorship, who was the mentorship relationship that gives you the knowledge and helps you, and then where do you find employment that was coming from other startups, or you find it somewhere else. So what we are seeing is that, and what is important in the point of the chart is, if you see at the growth of the connections, it grows at the same pace and exponentiality as the ecosystem. So those connections are vital for the ecosystem to grow. You need those connections not only for the social part, but also because of the resources and access that give you. Now, this next slide shows you how these connections actually work in practice. I mean, it's not only about a chart, it is about a network of connections. And what this picture is showing you is the network of connections of the ecosystem in Cairo. I choose Cairo instead of New York because New York is much more complicated and much more convoluted, and Cairo is simpler to see. And even though you can witness the complexity of these connections. The connections identified are the same ones as I explained before. This research is also done by Endeavor Insight. And what you can see is there are different rings that tells you the different years where the startups were created. And basically you are seeing the ecosystem expanding. And then the circles are the startups. And the bigger the circle, the more connected and central are to the ecosystem. So you can see that all the startups start being connected a lot. There is a lot of sharing of knowledge, but also identifying where the resources could be there. And there are also some champions that develop over time. Usually are the ones that were successful in the first round and then become like serial entrepreneurs or mentors or investors in the rest. And what we see is that you need those success stories, those role models, to be there and connect with the rest of the ecosystem. So based on that, we were thinking, okay, how do you create those connections? Where those connections happen? We were working in different ecosystems, and we have some anecdotal evidence that this was about what we call networking assets. And then we did some research about it. So what are the networking assets? Well, basically the networking assets are the events, the community building space, and networks of mentors or investors that create that social dimension that help you develop this interconnectivity of the network. And we list here a chart of examples of these networking assets. There are community building events like meetups, conference, challenge and competitions, but there are also skills training like boot camps or entrepreneurial technical rapid skills training. It's also about the collaboration spaces, especially the co-working spaces that build a community among them, the maker spaces, the accelerators and incubators. But it's also about the networks of mentors that happen, for instance, with angel investors. An angel investor doesn't invest in you only and gives you the money and they leave. No, an angel investor helps you connecting with people, helping you in the process. And this is what makes those connections an additional asset. And of course, other networks that you can find. But importantly enough, you can see these networking assets not only build community, which is critical, they also provide you basic assets like skills, like a space where you can develop the startup, and a place where you can find all this touching knowledge and connections, but also gives you access to finance. So it's important, this combination of assets that you can encounter. In our research, what we did is to identify, are these networking assets important or not for the ecosystem and the social connections? And what we found is that they are basically the key connectors of the ecosystem, and this is where the connections happen. So we confirm that this is key to develop this social dimension. Now, after knowing what is a critical success factor about the social dimension of the ecosystem, there are two specific considerations that I have to make. The first one is the concept of the ecosystem as a community. And we have seen that ecosystems, what is important is the social dimension and the connection among the different stakeholders. And this is important from the policy point of view, because there is a trend recently of addressing innovation in cities through technology districts or innovation districts. And this is the title of the slide when you say ecosystem versus district. What is a technology or innovation district? Well, Well, basically, it's the evolution of the traditional science park, where you had an area where you put all the innovation stakeholders, universities, R&D facilities, companies, and hopefully some entrepreneurs, and you hope for innovation to happen there. And that concept was translated into cities, and then some cities started to take a neighborhood and recreate that concept there, and rebuilding that area by bringing in all these actors and investing a lot in physical infrastructure. What we found in our research is that the geographic dimension by itself, putting everyone together, it matters relatively. It matters in as much as it creates that social connection. It creates that social dimension that we talked before. So it matters as much as possible as you do the events and you have the networking access we talked before. But we saw also another issue is that these ecosystems don't have geographic limitations. And what you see in the picture is just some research we did in New York. And the research is showing you that yes, there is geographic clustering, but then you can see the lines. Those are the social connections, which overimpose social dimension over the geographic dimension. And you can see that there is no geographic boundary. Even the natural boundaries, like the river, are crossed through the connections. And there is a fluidity of these startup ecosystems. They may start in an area, but then they move as the rents gets higher or the area matures, and they go into other areas. And you can see that in New York, that they started in Midtown, and now they are moving to Brooklyn, and now they are trying to move to Queens. And you see this kind of fluidity. So the point is, as a policymaker, you should focus on how do you develop this social dimension primarily. And if you're going to work in a geographic area, don't forget about expanding the social dimension and working on these networking events. The other second consideration that I wanted just to highlight is that it is, of course, the social dimension is important, but it is not sufficient. It's not the only thing you can do. You need to have also the supporting infrastructure for the ecosystem. And this is not to be confused with the physical infrastructure or the real estate infrastructure I talked about before. This is supporting infrastructure for the ecosystem. This is about having the finance pipeline, having enough finance seed investors, venture capital, and institutional investors, so the startup can go through all the process. Having enough step-out space, market access to market, etc. So what I wanted you to see is what happens if you don't have this supportive infrastructure. And this slide depicts Cairo and New York. It goes again to the research conducted by Endeavor Insights, and you can see the different connections with the different types of connection that I explained before. And there is a huge difference between New York and Cairo, and you can see it is in the green. And this is the investment connections. What does that mean? It's how many seed investors, angel investors, and VCs investors you have in both ecosystems. And what you can see is that Cairo has a big lack of that. And then you translate into the effects in Cairo, and you see Cairo generates a lot of startups, a lot of startup projects. But those startups have a hard time in becoming real startups and going through the ladder. So a lot of startups that then stall or just die or go abroad in the most success cases. So you also need to develop that infrastructure if you want to have the benefits of these tech startup ecosystems. Now, after talking about the trends and the key success factors, what I'm going to talk about is about the policies. And how can governments support the development of these startup ecosystems? How can they support the creation and sustainability of these ecosystems? But also how to maximize the effect that is inherent in these ecosystems. Particularly, how do you translate it into competitiveness of your business industry, into more employment and the effects of new employment, and also into urban innovation. So these policies, even though they are focusing on cities, can also be applied at the national level. In fact, in our projects and activities, we are working with both cities, but also with governments, like is the case of Lebanon or Colombia as a whole. So I will start with the policies related to building the ecosystem, creating an ecosystem when there is very little of it or there is nothing. The example that I'm bringing here is New York, and you can see the image in the back. The reason for that is because New York, even though it's a big city and it's very unique in itself, it basically went from having a very anecdotic tech startup ecosystem to becoming the second largest in the world. And it did it from 2008 till now, and with a strong support from the city. There were a lot of policies behind it. And those policies focus on the social dimension of the ecosystem, on building the ecosystem as a community, which were very successful. I'm going to explain these policies, which follow a sequence as they are depicted in the chart, and how were the highlights of each one of them. I can elaborate more of these different policies later in the Q&A if you are interested. So the first thing that New York did is to develop the community of entrepreneurs. There was not too much of a community, and they wanted to expand it and develop. How they did that? They did it by creating these networking spaces and mentorship. Basically, they started by creating something they call incubators, but that in reality they were co-working spaces that that had to build a community, had to do events that build the community, that allow the interaction with the wider entrepreneurs around the city.
Victor, again, briefly, what is a co-working space, in case people don't know?
Yes, so a co-working space is basically one of the networking assets that I explained before, and it's just a space where people can go to work in a shared desk. So basically, you don't have an office, you have an open space, traditionally, usually an open space or shared offices, where you have basic internet connectivity and maybe some coffee or cafeteria. Basically, it's to have access to a very cheap office space for you, where you can go work with your computer or anything. It's like a cafe, but built into an office. Well, the important thing about this co-working space is that it's not only about the space, it's about the community, and it forces people to start talking with each other. And then the spaces transform into community building spaces where they start doing events and learning about, oh, what kind of a startup you do, what kind of a startup these other people do, and they start connecting each other. So that is what New York focused on. And the other thing they did is to incorporate accelerators. And accelerators are different from traditional incubator system. It's not only about, I'm going to give you an office for you to develop the startup and maybe some business services. Accelerators is more about taking cohorts of potential startup projects and going from the idea into the startup itself, having a business model, having a real product that is ready to go to market, and having the connections to sell it to potential investors. So in doing these two things, they started creating this network of entrepreneurs. They started connecting among themselves. The other thing that they did that is very interesting is to bring competitions and meetups of the community. With the competitions, there are events that you also develop these networks, because people have to work with each other, are for 2 days connecting with each other. And then after that, they may not end up doing the startup project that was prepared for the competition, but something else. But in the end, what matters is they connect and know each other. Interestingly enough, New York started with these networking spaces in 2009. At that time, there was no co-working spaces in New York or accelerators. Now the city has over 30 accelerators and over 40 managed co-working space and over 200 of co-working space in general. So what they did basically is to catalyze the private sector to come and expand the ecosystem. Now the other two policies that they did following this is to develop and attract specialist talent. Believe it or not, there was not an abundance of high-tech talent in New York. The city didn't have a science, high-tech science or applied science campus in the city itself. And most of the entrepreneurs that they were having were coming from other cities. So basically, one of the things the city did is through the applied science initiative is to attract a big campus to come into the city. And they did it. That was a big project. They offered real estate space in Roosevelt Island, and they attracted Cornell Tech campus. But interestingly enough, what happens is they not only have Cornell Tech campus, they also attracted two other universities to come. And you have also Carnegie Mellon, and then NYU developed with the Polytechnical University. So that helped them a lot to start having a pipeline of talent. The other thing they did is to start introducing soft tech skills and training. So those networking spaces also had to do tech and entrepreneurship workshops and skills. So for people with no background in this area, start connecting and introducing themselves in the ecosystem, and also using libraries to open the tech skills into people outside the ecosystem. Other of the second policy that was doing in parallel with all this was to change perceptions. And for that, the city did a big splash in promoting the tech community and bringing significance to that. Why that's important? Well, it's important because if people don't believe on it, it's not going to come to do that, and they are not going to develop themselves as entrepreneurs. This is something we encounter, for instance, in countries like Lebanon. When we went to Lebanon and I started speaking with entrepreneurs 4 years ago, they told us, well, I have a lot of problems to become an entrepreneur, because if I tell my family that I am an entrepreneur, instead of working in an office, they think I'm a lazy person. So having that social perception goes against developing this entrepreneur. So you have to change that. And one of the things New York did it is through a big promotion campaign where the mayor was backing all this, where the city was backing that, was giving it relevance and importance. And finally, the other thing the city worked, and it was in sequence after they built the community, was to attract seed investment. So now you have some startups that are really getting serious and can be successful. Now you need the seed investment to come to the city. And the other thing,
seed investment is?
Yeah, so seed investment in terms of venture capital, in that case, is the investment around 50,000 to 150,000 that you need to kind of begin the business after it's a startup project, after you have a product that you can sell. And that's the beginning of scaling up. And this is in the intermediary between institutional investor and the very small angel investment. And the other thing that they did is attract multinational companies to acquire startups in New York. Why they did that? Well, because they wanted these multinational companies to start setting up in New York and starting elevating the talent and the image of the city. So this is just an example of policies to build the ecosystem in itself. Now, in the next slide, I'm going to talk about an example of policies to sustain the ecosystem. Once you have it built, how do you make it continue growing? And that's what we call sustainability here. And in this case, I'm going to draw examples from Lebanon, primarily, and the work we are doing with the government of Lebanon. So it's also sequential, as you can see there, and I'll speak about the different steps. The first one is, okay, you have a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of intermediaries going in the ecosystem, but at some point they need some coordination and support. And how to build that coordination and support? One of the ways of doing that is creating what we call an innovation hub, which is not other thing that creating a place where you convene all these stakeholders, universities, seed investors like venture capital, angel investors, like the intermediaries, accelerators, incubators, and so on, and then even the government. And you put them together to talk about the ecosystem and what are the problems of the ecosystem, what are the things that we need to do to support it, and who is going to do that. And that builds the consensus and the coalition of partners that you need as a policymaker, because you cannot do everything by yourself. Actually, you shouldn't. You just should help to put everyone on the same page and address the gaps together. You can do that also with a network of intermediaries. That's, for instance, the way New York did it. In Lebanon, we are working with an innovation hub in particular. The other two areas is you have to build the skills pipeline, but also the space and finance pipeline. And the skills pipeline is important because you're going to need a continued provision of skills for the startups, and then the scale-up business when they become SMEs and large companies. To be fed with skills, with high talent that can do that. And there are three policies that we are working on. And the first one is building university industry platforms that allow for apprenticeship programs in startups and SMEs and technology, providing rapid skills training that can, in between 16 to 19 weeks can provide the skills needed, basic technical skills for people to start working in what we call blue-collar technical skills, and I will explain these two policies in a little bit later in talking with employment. But basically, it's how to bring more people to have the needed technical skills for startups to start working with them. And then the third policy we are working is something we call Tech for Kids, but basically is how do you introduce basic skills or thinking about coding and open hardware in middle and high schools. So you start having a pipeline of population that is start thinking in the new way for tech in the workforce. That's important because new jobs are going to be based in tech, and if you have kids being prepared for that, it will be easier then to adapt to the skills that will be needed later. Not only you need the skills and the talent to start coming for the ecosystem to be fed, but also you need space and finance. And space may be more important or not in some cities, but for instance in New York was very important because it was very difficult to have a very cheap space for startups to have their office. We know the traditional way of the startups in Silicon Valley talking about building the startup in the garage, but that wasn't possible in New York. So you need co-working spaces, you need step-out spaces, and so on and so forth to provide for these startups, especially in urban environments. And then the finance pipeline is what we talk about. You have to have all the infrastructure of finance, from having the angel investor to the VC to the institutional investor. So all the path is supported. Finally, the other thing that you can work in is attracting multinationals and networks. And in that sense, this is more what New York has been doing, is bringing multinationals, but not only to bring the commercial office, but to bring the development and R&D facilities, at least a satellite of them, into your city. And then the networks is about having these global intermediaries that, for instance, accelerators like TechStart, to start building also a branch in your city, so it connects with the other ecosystems. Now, these were the two basic policies regarding building and sustaining the ecosystem. Now I will speak very briefly about once you have the ecosystem, how you maximize the potential impact of that ecosystem, particularly in competitiveness, in employment, and urban innovation. And the first one I will talk is about competitiveness. What we saw in global trends is how this innovation is changing between being big and the facilities to be open innovation, to start doing innovation with others, particularly with the startups. Well, sometimes that happens naturally, other times you can help catalyzing that. And this is where I talk about infecting the local industries. How can you use the local startups to start working together with the local industry and get this virus of entrepreneurship and innovation? There are three ways of doing that. The first two ones we are doing in Lebanon, and you cannot see it in the presentation, I apologize about that, but I'll explain them. The first one, we are working with traditional industries, is to start working together with them to show them how to do open innovation process with entrepreneurs. And we are doing that, for instance, we are started to do that with the banking industry, with separate traditional industry. How can we start doing workshops working with entrepreneurs to show them that we can solve their problems and become and develop new products that have value for them? So then they can see that this is something they want to continue doing.
Sorry, that was the banking industry.
That was the banking industry in particular, which is a very conservative industry, particularly in Lebanon. The second one we are doing is with more atomized industries that are more smaller SME level or so on. And we are working there with creative industries, particularly the fashion and the food industry. And what we are doing there is to develop labs, which are spaces where we bring, for instance, fashion designers with entrepreneurs. And then we put them together to start designing how can you use, for instance, digital manufacturing, 3D printing, how can you use wearables or conducted yarn to do new designs in fashion, and how that changed the way the fashion industry develops products for instance, in Lebanon. The same way with food. All that at the end ends up then producing specialized accelerators, and that's the case, for instance, of New York. And the chart you can see there is once those labs and those connections have developed, is then how do you accelerate what is coming from these labs into actual business? And for instance, in the case of New York, after maturing the ecosystem, you have specialized accelerators for local industries in New York. That is the financial industry, health industry, ed tech, education tech, real estate, or fashion. And you can see the batches of a startup they have per year. Interestingly enough, they do it with the local industry. So, for instance, in the fintech, Barclays is supporting one of these. Barclays Bank is supporting one of these accelerators. In education, is Kaplan. So you can see this connection. It's happening. At the end, you develop new products, new innovations that start in your city or your country. The other area that you can maximize the impact of the ecosystem is the expanding of the job creation. And this is two policies that we are working on, one in Nicaragua and one in Medellin, Colombia. In Nicaragua, we are working in developing this university industry platform, which is to create the links between universities and startups and SMEs to get apprentices and practical training instead of academic training for the new graduates. The idea is to start not only creating potential entrepreneurs, but also skills workforce that can feed the ecosystem. And this goes beyond technical or engineer developments. It also goes to any other kind of career. It's open. And then we have the rapid skills training or boot camps. And what we are looking there is how can you look at different educational levels that you have, even bachelor's degree or below bachelor's degree, and can train those people in 16 to 19 weeks and be ready for the workforce. And this is what we are seeing is the statistics in New York, where you can see half of the ecosystem that the education level is below bachelor's degree. And many of the things you can do is how to gain these skills, what we call blue-collar tech skills, as opposed to the white-collar tech skills, which is the founder and entrepreneur of in the ecosystem. And then finally, let's explain how to generate urban innovation, how to use this ecosystem to help develop innovations that support the city and the city services. And one of the ways, typical ways to do it is competitions and challenges. We did that in Gran Concepción in Chile, and you develop innovative solutions that you are not expecting. And this is basically bringing open innovation into the local government. And the example for that, it was for public transportation. One of the challenges that was put there is how do you improve the quality of service in the public transportation. And the solution at the end was a solution, very basic solution. It was a mobile app, but it was focused on blind people. And the transportation in that city is very informal. It's based on informal lines, so there is no bus stops. And blind people cannot use the system. It's very difficult for them to stop or the bus. What that application was doing is, based on your reference, alerting the blind people when he has to hail the bus and when the stop was coming. So basically, it's transforming the accessibility of a whole infrastructure just with a mobile app, instead of the traditional way that would have been building all this other infrastructure for blind people to see where the stop is, to have the braille, etc. Then there are other models that you can use to expand this, and this is Challenges and Urban Labs. This is based on Barcelona, which is basically how do you allow for real testing of solutions in your city, and you link it to local challenges that you have. So with that, I end the presentation. I can expand more on these examples in the Q&A or later. I wanted to provide you my contact information that you have in the presentation, and also to provide you some available resources that you have that will be posted in the platform, and they will have in the presentation. But basically, just going through them, you have advances of our research in the first part, and then two examples of the policies we've been developing with a lot of information about each one of the many policies I've been talking about. You have an example of developing the whole ecosystem that we are doing in Lebanon, and the example of using the government as a platform or for urban innovation that we're doing in Chile. And finally, the resources of the research available from Endeavor Insight.
And all those, the presentation and those links are already up on the IPP Community of Practice site. So if you want to have a look at them even now, please go ahead. Victor, thanks for that presentation. I was wondering, given that you are working in Lebanon, in Cairo, in as you say, Chile, in Nicaragua, I mean, what are some of the lessons that you've learned in terms of actually working on the ground in those different types of countries I mean, how different are they from each other? How easy is it to do this sort of stuff? And perhaps what are some of the things you've learned in terms of building these types of initiatives?
So one of the first things we encounter is all the ecosystems are different, but at the same they are very similar. So what I mean with that is, one of the first things I realized is you need to know the ecosystem very well, and you need to know all the players, because at the end this is a people's business, and you can only do it if you have a coalition of partners. And in some ecosystems, some things are more developed than others. In some ecosystems are less than others. So you have to analyze and understand what is missing. But at the end, when you go to the specific problems, when they are you identify the same one, the response is very similar. And the communities you are working on, the entrepreneurs are also very similar, even though despite the different cultures. And it's very interesting for me that they react in a very similar way despite the diversity. I would say that one of the key issues that we have encountered is the role of government and how successful it is. And we've seen is the less you have a top-down approach, the more you are more a catalyzer and others do the work, the more result you have. So it's all about others doing the work for you and you being the catalyzer and helping them to come when there is a market failure and funnel them through that.
So just on that, because we've got a number of questions from our participant group who are asking, so what can we do? What different levels of government? From in India, often in India, the city government isn't actually all that powerful. It's a regional thing. So so you're talking about catalysing. What does that actually mean in practice in terms of what a government can do?
Yeah, and what you are saying is very interesting because, for instance, we work in Chile where cities really don't exist. I mean, they are not cities.
City governments don't exist.
They don't exist. They are boroughs, and then the rest is the central government.
Right.
Starting after the borough, which the borough basically has very little authority. So how do you work in those environments and compared to, for instance, Colombia, which is totally, the cities have a lot of power and are very independent. So, of course, it depends on every country, but what I found is you find the government agency and there is some authority behind it. In Chile, we work with the central government. In Colombia, we work with the cities, for instance. In Lebanon, we work with the central government. And the idea that you have there is the closer you are to the citizen, the better, because you understand it better. But what the government done, all the policies that I've talked about, you can, as a government, catalyze them to start like doing, if you don't have enough networking access, co-working spaces, you can start doing the first one. But as soon as the private sector takes it over, you can recruit from there, let the private sector take it over, and then work in the next one, and then work in the next one. Many of the things you can do as a government is attract what you are missing in your ecosystem, or promote who is doing it well. And I went through all the policies. There are some of them that require more investment in terms of time or investment. Like, for instance, the skills ones will take more because education usually is under the government, and that's a way to go. But others, you just need to catalyze, and then the rest will happen. And to be supportive, of course, behind.
Okay. There was a question early on, and I'm trying to get to all of them, at least those that Victor hasn't and subsequently responded to. One of our participants asked, how do the communities actually organise themselves? How does that work? If government's a catalyser, and it's meant to then just make sure that probably not just private enterprise, it would involve technical colleges, etc. So, yeah. But okay, who organises it?
Yes.
How does that work?
That's a very good question, and I addressed it briefly when I was talking about sustaining the ecosystem, and that was this idea of innovation hub or networks of these stakeholders. So, for instance, the way we address it in Lebanon was, first we meet everyone, and then we see how interested they are in collaborating, because it has to come from them, of course. And after that, we said, okay, we're going to do an NGO where all of you are going to be represented. So an
NGO, you mean?
Yeah, like an institution. It can be an association.
So set up a not-for-profit.
Yeah, outside the government. So the government is not leading that. The government is another member, and it's not like imposing anything. It's just convening, because government can convene.
Yep.
And that's how we do it. Basically, we built a forum, and in that case, it has the form of an NGO or an association. You can do anything. What I learned from New York, for instance, the way they did it is just by doing a lot of consultations, and they convene those consultations whenever they want to do a new policy. Whenever they do an analysis of the ecosystem, say, okay, these are the gaps we see in the ecosystem. We're going to do a forum to ask you, and you be part of that. The way we did it in Chile was similar with that forum idea. But interestingly enough, what we asked them is, okay, what is the gap? Do you agree with that? And second is, how can you help? What can you put into that? And then forcing a little bit their interaction and their commitment to all that. And that's how we do it. What I found is after you kind of coordinate that a little bit, then miraculously, you don't have to do anything else.
They take over.
They take over. It's the beginning, the most difficult part, and to convince everyone that working together is better than not working together. And believe me, if you can do that in Lebanon, you can do it everywhere, because it's kind of complicated to put some parties together.
Okay. There was a question about, as there often is, about financing in particular, and whether, in your experience, because you spoke about Cairo, for instance, and the very small numbers of early stage investors. Is there, is it easy to build, I guess, communities of, especially of angel investors who are prepared to do angel investing? That is not just do dumb investing, but get on boards and actually actively participate. I mean, how important is that element of building an ecosystem?
No, it's very, very important, and the problem is, if you ask me how important, all of them end up being important because it's an ecosystem, it's interlinked, so that's the problem. But yeah, very relevant, especially for the growth. You have the ideas and then how they evolve. And I found from the research and the questions and the surveys we have been accessing to and developing, what I found is that is critical in the part of the mentorship. Sometimes the access to investment in some countries, the government that start doing the financing and giving like the beginning. But what you found is when you have that and there is no one supporting you that have done this trip before, all the entrepreneurs say like, it was very difficult. I hope someone could have helped me and done that. I think that's one of the critical parts to do it. How do you go from having nothing into developing these role models that can also invest and be committed? I don't have a straight answer to that one. We've been experimenting into, for instance, in Nicaragua, which is an environment where you don't have that. How do you start accessing traditional wealth and trying to bring them into that? It's a process, and it's little by little showing value and opportunities. How do you bring external people from that are diaspora, for instance, into starting doing that? There's no clear answer, but the idea is you start little by little, and you hope that you get a tipping point where by itself it attracts.
That's true, and I should say our colleagues here in the bank in InfoDev are doing quite a lot of work on how to build innovation ecosystems at the city level. And what we'll do is post on the website as well a guide that they have developed for how policymakers can establish angel investment networks and what you have to do. As Victor says, it's not easy, but it is an essential part. And angels in particular have because they tend to be local, they're often motivated by the desire to contribute and to be part of the ecosystem. So in particular, I think angels have some nice spillovers that if you can develop that community.
Yeah, no, I think they are critical in the sense that they really care about the success of the company. And that's super important because if you get money and then they disappear, you're alone again. And we saw that how important it is for those ecosystems to have the social support and that previous knowledge.
We've had a bunch of questions about what the roles are potentially for government and who should do this, and I think you've probably addressed that in that it depends. I mean, it really depends on what your government structure is, but this can be done obviously at a very local level, but also, as you said, in Colombia, it's actually a national initiative that occurs in different cities. Is that right?
Chile.
Oh, Chile, was it? Yeah, right. Okay.
And in Chile, it's the cities don't exist themselves. So it was the national government we work with. And you're right, in Colombia we work with the cities, but we're also working with the national government to do this at the national level, involving all the cities. So it's a mix of different authorities.
There was a question about how cities can work with, I think the question was actually Unicom, with those larger companies, are there international networks of entrepreneurs that that cities can potentially access or get involved in?
That's actually a very good question, and the answer is, again, as always, there are and there aren't. They are very fluid, and that's the problem. That it doesn't exist like you don't call on their door. Oh, I'm the network of entrepreneurs. That doesn't exist by itself. But yeah, there are a network of entrepreneurs, and it's very informal, and it's happening. So one of the things we develop ourselves is this network of innovation hubs in different cities, and our idea is to bring the intermediaries that have those connections with the ecosystem to start working together. And when we do activities, we bring them and we start connecting with them to bring the two ecosystems. So for instance, recently we did that connection between Lebanon and Chile. How can we start bringing these intermediaries that have the network of entrepreneurs to connect with each other so they see what is important among them, among the two ecosystems, and start connecting their entrepreneurs? That's one way we are doing that. The other way is to use big conference of entrepreneurs and these intermediaries to start connecting yourself into that. And so those are the two ways you can do it. But again, it's very fluid and it's very informal, so it's a lot of work that you have to develop.
And they're all us. I mean, there are organisations like Endeavour who you're working with who, I mean, if Endeavour doesn't exist in a country, it would be whatever governments can do to encourage it to establish. And you might very briefly want to explain what Endeavour is, for instance.
And so Endeavour works with to develop entrepreneurs that are that they have gone through the proof of concept. So it has to be beyond the startup project. It's a little bit more advanced, and then they work to scale them up. So having presence of an Endeavour in your ecosystem is very important, because then they have a global network. But it's not only Endeavour, and we talked about that before. It's also having people like Techstars, and you want to have a Techstars in your city, because then the graduation of those accelerators will connect with others. So for instance, that's something that Korea is developing. I think it's very interesting how NII start connecting their accelerators with these global accelerators or multinational accelerators around the world, and starting sending their startups as they graduate to these others to build the network. Another example, for instance, how they did it is Startup Chile. Startup Chile is another interesting example of building this network of international network. I mean, you can debate whether they had success or not bringing entrepreneurs, but what they were very successful is having an alumni around the world. So now you're a startup from Chile and you want to connect with, for instance, Liechtenstein. You probably have a Startup Chile entrepreneur around that, and then you can connect with that. And we saw that, for instance, when we brought the ecosystem from intermediaries from Chile to Lebanon, we found Startup Chile graduates in Lebanon, and they connected very, very fast.
Okay. Just looking at any questions, a number of questions about what the potential role of urban local bodies is in India. I must confess, we're probably not expert enough about India to comment on that. There was a question earlier about creative industries and whether they're usually a target. Obviously in New York they were, but perhaps is the answer, well, if you have creative industries then they might be, but the whole point about a lot of these policies is they're meant to be bottoms up and based on what you have, what economic strengths do you have in the first place. Is that right?
Is that right? Totally. And it's working with your ecosystem and seeing what are the local industries. So for instance, when we work in Chile, we were talking about industries like getting the wood industry, and
sorry,
for the forest, the wood that you have.
Oh, wood. Timber or lumber.
Timber or lumber industry, which is like, oh, okay, how are you gonna do that? But that was the local economy, so we needed to start working with them, and then it was more industrial. When we are working in Lebanon, we are looking at the creative industries. Of course, if you have creative industries, it's very good, because the creative industry community is very similar to the tech industry community, and then they link very well, and they feed each other. So you can actually, serve as a very good catalyzer.
Okay, I think we're probably coming to a close. I will say that the example of New York is really interesting, because although people, especially in our client countries, might look at New York and say, well, how on earth can we compare ourselves to New York? It's New York. It has Wall Street, etc. But one of the interesting things is that 10 years ago it really had none of this sort of tech innovation ecosystem. And just because it had Wall Street and just because it had millions of very clever, well-educated people, it didn't deliver this. So what it did actually need are some quite specific interventions to build the ecosystem. I think another interesting point is often that we see in our client countries that there is a strong focus really on physical infrastructure, even when it comes to building entrepreneurship. They say, okay, well, we'll build an accelerator and we'll set up an innovation fund, and then magic happens. And yet, I think what you're saying is that those intangibles around networks, etc., which can be really sort of fluffy and difficult to measure, but in fact, if you don't have them, nothing much happens.
Yeah, no, and that's I think for me that's the main point, which is like the critical factor is to have those connections.
And they're most likely to be developed by local governments or by people on the ground, not by central, just because they're too far away, is it?
It's totally right, and you need, it's a people's business, and I'm sorry I repeat that a lot, but it's true, and it takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of, you have to waste a lot of time meeting people, knowing what they need, how can you go around it, how can you connect them and help them, and you need to do that on the ground. You cannot do it from above.
Okay, we will have to close this. So on behalf of WBI here in the bank and also the platform, thank you very much to Victor for giving this presentation.
Thank you very much.
If there are questions that we haven't got to, we'll go back over them, and if there is additional material that we think will be relevant, we'll post it on the IPP Community of Practice site. Thank you everyone from all around the world who have phoned into this. There is a feedback mechanism, and very much appreciate you filling that out. But welcome back to this series of IPP webinars. There'll be another one next month, and we hope to see you then. But on behalf of the World Bank, thank you and farewell for now.